Greetings and welcome to this edition of Campus Conversations. I'm Dan Mogila from the university's Office of Communications and Public Affairs. As many of you know, we regularly use these events as a way to get acquainted with academic and administrative leaders on campus. And today I'm really pleased to welcome a really dynamic duo from the Graduate School of Journalism, Dean Geeta Anand and David Barstow, the head of the school's investigative reporting program. Let me give you a bit of biographical information about each of our guests. Before beginning to teach here in 2018, Dean Anand worked as a journalist for 27 years, most recently as a foreign correspondent for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal in India. Her stories on corporate corruption won her and the Journal a Pulitzer Prize in 2002. She's also an author. Her nonfiction book, The Cure, about a dad's fight to save his kids by starting a biotech company, was made into a Harrison Ford movie, Extraordinary Measures, in 2010. Geeta was appointed to be Dean of the J School last October. David Barstow is the first reporter in American history to win four Pulitzer Prizes. He earned these honors over a span of 20 years while working for the investigative unit at the New York Times. Most recently, David and his colleagues at the Times were awarded the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting for an 18-month investigation of, you've got it, President Trump's finances. More on that later. In 2019, he joined the J School faculty, where he now leads the effort to groom future investigative reporters by enlisting them in major investigative projects. As always, we welcome any and all questions you may have for our guests. Just go ahead and post them on our Facebook Live streaming site as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them. So let's jump in. Geeta, I'd like to sort of start with you with kind of like a basic question. What led you to leave what sounds like an amazing career in journalism and come into higher education?
I wanted to have an impact on future generations of journalists. I loved mentoring young reporters, and I wanted to come to teach and change the way people are taught journalism. So I arrived here actually as a professor first, excited about teaching. And then David and I, during the pandemic, were able to turn the journalism school in 1 week into a newsroom covering COVID for the New York Times. And I just saw what was possible at a huge public university, that you could make huge change and offer huge publishing opportunities and exciting opportunities for meaningful journalism here at the school. So I ended up excited to become dean of the school because I just saw that extraordinary things were possible in journalism education. And it was possible to have a huge impact in training and influencing the next generation of journalists.
So what do you mean by the fact that you set up a newsroom for the New York Times? They have hundreds of their own reporters. Are you saying that your own students have been publishing material that's been seen in the newspaper and on its website?
I am absolutely saying that, Dan. So the New York Times has, I think, the largest number of subscribers in any state for the New York Times are in California. But the New York Times, at least at the time early last year when the pandemic struck, had very few correspondents in California, relatively speaking. So the New York Times was excited to have 50 or 60 more reporters here in California covering the pandemic in one of the areas that was most affected. So we partnered with them for our students to go about reporting stories, and then for David and me to edit them. And that editing was a crucial part of the process, so that we were sending them stories that were fully edited and fact-checked by us, which they could then edit again and publish in the New York Times. And half of our student body were published in the New York Times during this time.
So we're going to be talking more as we go along about what's going on at the J School now and what your hopes and aspirations and objectives are for the future. But let's just stay with your personal past a little bit. I'm wondering if you miss anything about journalism. I crossed over as well. I spent a lot of time overseas for CBS News. Sometimes I miss the fun and excitement of that. And I'm wondering if there's anything about your former life that you pine for.
I would pine for it if I weren't so deeply engaged in storytelling and journalism right now. So this job is just so completely challenging in every way, much like a story. Every day has several crises, just like every story is a crisis because it's a new topic. You often know nothing about it. You have to figure out how to get people to talk to you, how you're going to get to this place. Similarly, my job is just a constant series of challenges, doing things I've never done before. Whether it's fundraising for journalism, so telling the story of journalism for people who could contribute to our school, to figuring out how to attract really promising faculty here. That's storytelling and challenging. So strangely, Dan, I don't miss it at all because I'm so deeply engaged in it, but in a totally different way.
Very cool. We're going to also be talking as we go along about the state of journalism today, get both of your perspectives. With that, let me cross over to David. David, let me ask you the same question. I mean, that's a heck of a career you had there at the New York Times, but what, you got bored? You were looking for something different? You couldn't stand New York? What made you come into the academy?
No, none of those actually. In fact, I will say, actually, the thing that I miss is I was a reporter. I was always a reporter. I was never an editor. And I spent my whole career chasing after really big stories. And I definitely miss, the thing that I miss the most, Dan, is when you pull up at someone's house that you're hoping that you can convince them to talk and open up to you for a story, someone that you're hoping will become an important whistleblower or source in a story, and the feeling of the adrenaline rush that you get as a reporter when you're walking up to that door and you're getting ready to knock on it. I miss very much. But back to your question, for me, the reason why I'm here is very simple. The idea of a society built around truth and around facts, and as opposed to a society that's built around nonsense and propaganda, I feel like that's really worth fighting for. And so I came to Berkeley because I think the truth needs reinforcements, and I'm here to recruit those reinforcements, and especially to recruit students who have a passion and interest in my specialty, which is investigative reporting, which at the end of the day, investigative reporting is all about holding power to account. It's about racing toward places where power is concentrated and asking the toughest questions. And I just loved the idea of doing everything I could to encourage, cajole, whatever I could do to pull more bright, brilliant students into investigative reporting. For me, that felt like actually a larger contribution that I could make to journalism than if I just continued to write stories at the New York Times. And so for me, it's been an incredibly exciting transition. It's been thrilling to work with so many students. We've helped publish 129 stories by our students in the New York Times, the LA Times, ProPublica. We've had 9 of our students on page 1 of the New York Times, and that has just been thrilling.
So let me ask you both to answer this one. What's driving the students? I mean, because there's all this reporting and talk about the collapsing business models of journalism and newspapers going out of business and TV networks not being what they used to be, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's driving the students? What's driving this continued interest? Geeta, let me start with you on that.
I think that young people today see that democracy is threatened, and they see journalism as the primary tool to combating this threat to democracy. They see journalism as a way to hold the powerful accountable, to bring up issues about racial inequality, to pursue the truth and try to reveal facts. So in this environment where democracy is so threatened by vast amounts of disinformation, by authoritarianism, and where there's this existential threat to all of us, climate change, they see journalism as a way of having a voice in this world and being able to bring attention to the issues that matter most.
David, let me ask you the same question and narrow in a little bit on investigative journalism, which when it's published is really sexy and impactful, but as we both know, it's a real slog getting there. What's bringing students, what's appealing to students? What's driving them in your investigative reporting program?
Well, first of all, I think that they actually see and recognize the impact that investigative reporting has when it's done right. And they're really craving the skills and wanting to learn the skills and absorb the skills to do this kind of work. And they're also impatient to do this work, right? They want to start now. They want to dive in now. They don't want to wait 20 years, which was sort of the way it was maybe when I entered journalism. And I think that speaks to Geeta's point that there's a sense that this is a really critical moment in the history of this country. And they absolutely know the score in terms of, the business has been under siege and has faced economic troubles, and now it's increasingly facing political and cultural pushback. And yet, they are just so determined to try to do what they can to build, as I said, a society that revolves around truth and around facts. And when you look around the world, when you look around the globe, and you look at authoritarian regimes, the first thing in the playbook is let's make sure there's no investigative reporters around to ask those pesky questions. They're putting investigative reporters in prison. They're pushing them into exile. In some cases, they're actually taking even more horrible steps than that. And I think that our students have shown incredible determination and guts in signing up and saying, "Hey, put me in, help me do this kind of work." And so that's what we're doing at the investigative reporting program. Is we are having students deeply engaged and involved in significant investigative reporting projects on a whole range of issues.
Thank you. Fascinating. And before we go on, just want for those who may have joined us late, we're absolutely delighted to take your questions. They can be posted to our Facebook Live streaming site. We've already got a few that are coming in that look really good, and we'd be happy to take more as we go along. You've been in office now for just under a year. What are your priorities? Where do you want to take the J School? What's most important to you right now?
The most important thing is supporting our students. Journalism and journalism leadership has for too long been made up predominantly by privileged social groups. So at this journalism school, we're trying to take the limits off who gets to be a journalist. We've been doing this for some time, admitting.
I want to interrupt you for a sec, just make sure everybody, so when you say limits, are we talking about socioeconomic, class, gender? What are the limits you're talking about taking off?
So we're talking about diversifying the industry in every way. So by class and race and gender identity. But the limits that I'm talking about are often economic limits. So enabling first-generation college students to be able to become journalists, because the economics of journalism education don't work, because it costs $60,000 or $70,000 or $50,000 if you're in state, but closer to 60 or 70 if you're out of state to get a journalism education. it's often been people with economic means that could do that and then go out into the world and take those entry-level journalism jobs that you and I did, which paid at the time $15,000 a year and now pay more like $25,000, $35,000, $40,000 a year. But you need to be able to take those jobs, those stepping stone jobs, to gain the skills to work at larger publications that pay well. So what we want to do at the journalism school is make sure our students, our diverse student body, is supported enough to be able to do their journalism work and publishing during the 2 years they're here, that they're not working 3 jobs and exhausted in class. And then that when they leave, they can afford to pay off their debt or not have debt and actually take these entry-level jobs to become journalists. So I'm focused, that means, on scholarships and financial aid for our students, because the most important, like, why are we even here if most of our students can't become journalists? I want to enable most of them, our diverse, talented, passionate student body, to become journalists, to use this education to be the truth tellers of the world. So that's my primary goal. The other, while they're here, David's a key partner in this. We want to enable them to get published. We believe in learning by doing journalism. It's an apprenticeship, and creating the partnerships here with places like the New York Times and ProPublica and PBS Frontline and the Associated Press for our students to have published work by the time they leave. That's been really important. So I guess I'll just focus on those.
Yeah, Dave, I'm going to come to you, David, with a similar question, but a comment just came in, which is interesting from somebody watching. It says, we need to create these new models of journalism so that we can render the old system obsolete. How do we do that? Geeta, let me come back to you and then we'll circle back to David. How do we render the old system obsolete, or is that exactly what you're talking about?
I'm not necessarily talking about rendering the old system obsolete, but I'm talking about creating, separately from removing the economic obstacles to becoming a journalist. I know that we need new economic models for journalism, right? Because all of the advertising, or most of it, has gone to social media. That means some of the largest publications have tried to change their economic model and rely on subscriptions. This sounds wonderful, except that many people are unwilling to pay for those subscriptions. So it's really hard to counter disinformation with a story from the New York Times or Wall Street Journal that's behind a paywall. But we also see the value of nonprofit models of journalism. Whether these can be like the replacement for the for-profit model, I'm not sure. But clearly, the nonprofit model does work and has created some of the best journalism organizations in the world. Like ProPublica has become the best investigative journalism publication, bar none, and in 10 or 15 years. So my view is we have to continue to innovate. Nonprofits aren't the end of the road. We still have to find that model that works, whether it's taxing social media companies and that funding going to journalism entities. We need the best brains in the world focused on what the solution is, because we haven't found it.
And David, let me come to you with a similar question. What sort of your goals and aspirations for the investigative reporting program, and how you see that leading to a better future for the entire journalistic enterprise?
Well, I think that, coming back to Geeta's point, investigative reporting in particular in this country, looking back over the last 3 or 4 decades, has really been hurt badly by the fact that too many investigative reporters look exactly like me. And I don't think when I think about, just to take 2 really important examples of great investigative reporting over the last 5 years. One would be the investigative reporting into Harvey Weinstein, followed by which triggered the Me Too movement. And I actually don't think it was an accident at all that those stories were pursued by two terrific colleagues of mine, both women in the investigative unit at the New York Times, and was edited by a woman at the New York Times. The other one that I would point to is the 1619 Project, which has obviously generated a huge conversation about the role of race in the history of the United States. And I don't think it's an accident that the impetus behind that series was a brilliant Black reporter at the New York Times. And so one of the goals that I have is I want to put an end to the kinds of conversations that I heard over and over and over again at the New York Times. Every time there was an opening in the investigative unit, the question would come out, do we know any good qualified investigative reporters of color out there? And too often the answer was no. And so the thing that I am desperate to do, and I think Berkeley is the perfect place to do it, is to really help diversify exactly who gets to become an investigative reporter in this country. And that's absolutely one of our top objectives. It's also why we are pushing so hard on publishing and getting our students involved directly in publishing stories that they conceive and that they are producing, because that's the coin of the realm for getting jobs as investigative reporters in this country. You have to kind of prove that you can do it, and then you're let into the club, so to speak. And then the other piece of that is when you do these big stories. We had three students of ours did a major story for ProPublica and on extremism in this country and the rise of extremism in this country. And those stories, when our students do those stories, they just fall madly in love with investigative reporting and being investigative reporters. And so for both of those reasons, that's why we're pushing so hard on actually, producing serious, high quality investigative reporting right here from Berkeley.
Super. So we have some really great questions coming in. In fact, they're much better than the ones I was thinking of asking. So I'm going to turn to them now and throw these out. So the first is, how are we training new journalists for online reporting as this person believes print is dead? So first, do you buy the fact that print is dead? And regardless, what are the specific things we want students to know so they can thrive as journalists in the online world? Geeta, let me come to you first on that one.
I don't believe that print is dead, but of course the online world is thriving. So we have to teach our students multimedia journalism skills. That is skills to be able to tell stories with visuals, bringing in audio. We have to tell them how to research stories online. We have to teach them digital security, how to protect themselves online when they're investigating difficult topics like extremism. We also have to and are teaching them how to use social media and people's Twitter accounts and their Facebook accounts and their online footprint as sources of information, as ways to find people, and then as ways to report on what they've done. And we're actually doing that this semester with a class that David is teaching in collaboration with the Human Rights Center, which teaches open source reporting techniques. And they are working together in a class with some law school students, some journalism school students, and some others on two large investigative stories. And we already have arrangements with the Associated Press and the Center for Investigative Reporting for those stories to be published at the end of the semester. So David can talk a little bit more about that. So we are absolutely embracing journalism online in every way, but you also have to teach people the basic skills to be able to tell any story in any platform. That is, how do you interview people? How do you report something? How do you find information? How do you confirm information is accurate and true? And in many ways, the open source investigation techniques are very helpful in that way. So there's more and more and more techniques, but you do need to learn some fundamentals. Like ethics. Ethics is key. Journalism law is key. So we teach those things as well, but we're expanding what we teach.
David?
So, I mean, the question's absolutely spot on. I mean, when you ask anyone under, I don't know, the age of 30, do you read a newspaper? Nobody raises their hand on that. And so I certainly agree on a generational basis that newspapers and the idea of buying a newspaper is really no longer operational. But that said, what I do think, and Geeta kind of touches on this, what is important and will remain important in an online world is the ability to write well. So while newspapers are dead, text is very much alive. And one of the interesting things, and I say this in a slightly defensively as someone who writes really long stories, is that actually what's so interesting is that the thing about the online world is you can obviously measure it.